Have you ever felt fatigue throughout the day, run down? How about feeling that way every single day? Is it because of a lack of coffee in the afternoon, or is there a deeper issue going on? On today's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast, Julie and I sit down with Jenn Malecha, who specializes in helping clients not only battle fatigue, but issues such as chronic weight gain, as well as many other conditions that are common within our society, but often seen as normal. We discussed thyroid function, liver function, gut function, HbA access, and the relationship between it all, and why dysfunction in one area may be sending a whole slew of symptoms throughout your entire body. We're going to cue the intro song, and then we're going to dive right into this conversation with Jenn Malecha. Welcome to the Exercise is Health podcast, where we're talking about exercise, health, and the interconnectedness of the two. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we will be coming to you every single week from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Exercise is Health podcast. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we're coming to you from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg, here in Schaumburg, Illinois. Now, at Muscle Activation Schaumburg, we believe your health is your most valuable asset, and the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise. Specifically, exercise is geared towards building the health and function of your muscles. But we know that exercise is not the only piece of this health puzzle, and because of that, we have a phenomenal guest for you today, none other than Jenn Malecha. Jenn Malecha supports busy, health-minded professionals in taking back control of their health by giving them access to the right lab tests and resources so they can find the missing pieces of their health puzzle, actually fix what is wrong, and get back to feeling like themselves again. Using over a decade of personal training experience, training in functional diagnostic nutrition and transformational coaching, she creates personalized health rebuilding programs for clients that are realistic and sustainable for long-lasting results, and that empower clients to be the boss of their own health. If you're ready to look at the big picture of your health, not just one disconnected piece at a time, to embrace healthy as a way of being, and to stop settling for anything less than you deserve when it comes to your health and happiness, then Jenn is exactly who you've been looking for. Jenn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on here, you guys. Excited to be here chatting with you.
Yeah, for sure. We're very, very excited about what we're going to dive into today, but give us a little bit more background on yourself. How did you get interested in functional diagnostic nutrition and the tie-in between that, exercise, and transformational coaching?
Yeah, well, exercise was actually the foundation for me. So I originally went to college to get a degree in kinesiology. So I studied fitness, nutrition, and health, basically. And I was at the time really inspired to become a sports psychologist because I grew up with a single dad and loved football. Like Joe Montana was one of my idols growing up, and was really active as a kid. And so I was always fascinated by that. Like I was the kid that was out playing in the street until the sun went down. So I had this big ambition to become a sports psychologist. And through that process in college, I studied athletic training and eventually decided to kind of pivot my career direction because the whole route to becoming a sports psychologist was a lengthy one because you had to do undergraduate and then postgraduate master's work. And so I was like, well, what is it that I really want to do? And ultimately, I just loved helping people improve their health. So I actually became a personal trainer. And that's where I got my start in the industry, and I was obsessed with the physical aspects of health so much. I loved working out with people. Like I just remember like going into my first personal training job and being able to apply what I learned in my degree and be able to help people. And also applying that to myself was like super fun. And I trained for fitness shows and all these kinds of fun things that we do in the fitness industry. And that led me though down this path to functional diagnostic nutrition, because one of the things that I started to notice as a personal trainer and then in running a gym on my own was that slowly, like over time, my health started to decline. And then I also started recognizing that my clients weren't necessarily getting the anticipated results from the whole calories in versus calories out concept that we have been conditioned to think is the formula for health, right? When people say like, oh, improve your cholesterol, eat less and move more, or lose weight, eat less and move more is the constant like formula that is not a one size fits all approach. So this really inspired me to look a little bit deeper and probably the catalyst to that was when I was diagnosed with skin cancer at a really young age at 24. And there was no family history or really reasons as to why I had the skin cancer. But leading up to that moment, I had an onset of seasonal allergies in my 20s that then progressively got worse over time, to the point where I would have ear infections like once a year that would wipe me out for a couple of days. I remember as a trainer getting a double Americano from Starbucks in the afternoons and still struggling to keep my eyes open when I was training clients. Like literally, like I remember leaning up against the gym wall and just like being like, I got to make it do this client. And I was like, these things just aren't normal. And so the skin cancer really was a catalyst that helped me dig deeper into that. And that's when I came across the functional diagnostic nutrition training program and went through that. And I was so amazed at the concepts that were taught in there. Like it was this new way of looking at disease and looking at health, really. Reed Davis is the founder of that program. And seeing him talk about the physiological aspects of the body, I was shocked that in all of my biology, physiology classes, stuff that I had studied in college, that nobody actually talked about these things like oxidative stress and liver congestion and HPA axis or nervous system balance and hormone balance. And through that process, that training program, you run a couple of the lab tests on yourself. And that's when I found I had bacterial overgrowth going on in my gut, something called H. pylori, which really tears up your digestive tract and your stomach acid. And I also had high oxidative stress, which is an indication for cellular and DNA damage. I basically had a congested liver at the time, and I had adrenal dysfunction, like hormone imbalances that were going on. And so it was no reason that I basically created this environment for cancer. And through that process, though, I also learned the tools on how to help somebody restore health. So utilizing that data from lab testing, then I'm able to create a health building program that includes diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, supplementation that's guided by that objective data through those lab tests. And ultimately, I've restored my health over time. And now I help people basically do the same thing. And I love now partnering with personal trainers and other types of health practitioners. I'll tell clients, I'll say, hey, invite your personal trainer or your acupuncturist or somebody into these results review sessions. And it's been so helpful for me to give this information now back to trainers working with clients and saying, hey, this is how you can modify their workout routine to get better results or outcomes or support their body while they're going through this healing process, which is super cool too.
Wow. One of the things that blew me away is that, I'm listening to your story, but then I'm like, oh wait, she started with the fact that this all cultivated to skin cancer at 24. By the way, exercise background, personal training. Like, you probably looked healthy from the outside, but you probably weren't feeling very healthy if you were having to keep your eyes taped open just to stay awake. That is crazy. So as we jump into this, you shared so much that we could unpack right there. I don't think we'll be able to get to everything today, but if someone's listening to this podcast, what would be normal signs and symptoms that someone feels that would be like, oh, wait, I should probably reach out to someone like Jenn and see if this would help me out? What are people feeling, or what were you feeling that is like, I might feel like I'm healthy, I'm exercising, I might be eating some good stuff, but what's going on in terms of signs that your body's telling you we need to look a little further?
Oh my gosh, I love this question because this is so great. And to summarize, what was happening is what you explained. So I was the picture of perfect health. I remember going in for my annual physicals and talking to my doctor about this. And they're like, but all your lab work looks perfect. And because I quote unquote ate healthy and exercise, they're like, you're the picture of perfect health. Everything's great. And nobody ever dug deeper. So we've been conditioned to think that just because symptoms are common, that they're normal, and they're not. And that's definitely what I would say is the number one thing, is that just because everybody else is experiencing it doesn't mean that you should be necessarily. And we're often told that, oh, this is a part of the aging process. As you get older, your hormones just get wackier, or you put on weight, or you just generally feel more tired. And I can tell you guys, when I started this journey at 24, I feel better now than I ever did in my 20s. My hormones are more balanced. I have more energy. It's the little things that matter, because most times people wait till they get to a traumatic event where they have a breakdown or a burnout or a heart attack or a stroke or whatever it is to make a change. But there's signs all along the way. So when I look back, and this relates to your question and answering it, is what are those things? Having that kind of fatigue, not normal, right? Like, we're supposed to feel energized, especially in the morning. I hear this with so many people where they're like, it's hard to get out of bed, but once I get going, then I'm kind of okay. Or I have this dip in the afternoon, like at 3, 4 o'clock. Those are not normal signs. That is a direct indication that your circadian rhythm, or your, what we call your HPA axis, your adrenal function, nervous system, we can call it a lot of different things, is already starting to experience some imbalances. Things like seasonal allergies, again, another thing that we chalk up to being normal. Everybody has them, right? That is an indication of an immune response, probably an overly inflamed immune system that's going on. Anxiety, depression, stubborn like weight loss, like weight that won't budge, or if you start accumulating it over time, whether it's slowly or fast, are some of probably the most common things that I hear people talk about that we just shouldn't be ignoring. Like, our body is talking to us all the time. And I think what's important is that we just have to tune into that. And one of the things that I encourage people to do is say, like, revert back to your 2-year-old self. And why do I say that? Well, what are 2-year-olds known for? They're constantly asking why, but why? But why, mommy? Why, daddy? Why does that happen? So when we have something going on in our body, like physically, when we're feeling something, we need to ask the question, why? Why am I feeling so fatigued? Why are these allergies getting worse over time, or did they suddenly come on? Like, why can't I lose weight? Why am I putting on weight? What is going on? Why do I have these aches and pains? Because it's really not normal. It is 100% possible to feel better than you currently do, probably right now.
I can really appreciate the idea that you brought up of this is common versus this is normal. And I think this is something that, Julie and I see in our practice a lot as well, especially as people get older. The idea that, well, it's normal for me to have aches and pains. It's normal for my body to not feel well. And then I love that you brought up the idea of fatigue. I think so often when we see somebody who's in their mid 50s, mid 60s and beyond that is super energetic, we just chalk it up to, that's just how they are. I guess they're just kind of built that way or whatever. And don't get me wrong, like maybe genetically they haven't had to do that much and they've just been able to be that way. But what I love that you're saying is, it seems like for most of us, there are some things that we need to account for. And there are some things that, we need to make sure we are checking in on from time to time to make sure that our energy levels stay good, that our cognitive function stays good. So what are some of the things, the more common things that you typically check with a client when they come and their first meeting with you and they're saying, hey, you know what, my fatigue is just always there. I need the double espresso at 2 p.m. to stay awake. What are some of the labs you might run, and what is the purpose of running those tests?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I like to get a cumulative history on what's been going on. Because as I say, like, whatever you're experiencing today is an accumulation of things that have happened over your lifetime that have led to this point and this feeling. So I think getting an in-depth history, like, I actually start all the way at the point of birth, because if they were a C-section baby or they weren't breastfed, those are things that impact the immune system right from day one, that then can set us up for some of these health issues that we experience in our teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. We can see these signs along the way, but in general, from a lab testing perspective, I always like to run a series of lab tests to look at the hormones, immune, digestion, detoxification, energy, and nervous system at the same time to get the big picture. Because, the body is a complex network of systems. So none of those systems is working on a singular basis. They're all impacting each other. And we have to understand this overall metabolic chaos or situation that might be occurring in the body. So the best way to do that is to run a series of labs to look at these things. So to get even more specific, I love to run Precision Analytica's Dutch test, which is a urine test to look at all the sex hormones. It looks at cortisol rhythm, which is our circadian rhythm, or looks at HPA axis function. It looks at some of the other steroid hormones. It looks at phase 1 estrogen metabolism. So we can look at things like liver congestion clues or insulin resistance. It also has some other nutritional markers on there, such as like B12, B6, glutathione. It looks at oxidative stress for that cellular DNA damage. And it looks at a couple of the neurotransmitters, which give us some insights onto mood balance and also gut health, since those are primarily produced in the gut. I love running a diagnostic solutions stool test, the GI map, because that's going to look at then parasites, bacteria, yeast overgrowth that are maybe creating internal stress and inflammation, disrupting the immune system, impacting digestion, absorption of nutrients. Plus, on that test, we can look at some other intestinal health markers directly related to somebody's ability to digest, as well as inflammation and reactions to like gluten, for example. I find a hair tissue mineral analysis test really insightful as well, because that will look at all the other mineral balances, and it correlates really nicely oftentimes with what we're seeing on a Dutch test and a stool sample test and a food sensitivity test, because people are eating healthy like I was, right? Like I was eating boneless, skinless chicken breast and broccoli, which is the epitome of eating healthy. But those foods weren't ideal for my body because I was having an immune reaction to some of them. Then we can start to look at some of those factors, which again are going to impair digestion, absorption of nutrients, plus just create a ton of inflammation. And then probably the fifth and most important one is metabolic typing, which is a concept of looking at how does the body actually process fuel? Like, are you a fast oxidizer, slow oxidizer? Are you more parasympathetic or sympathetic driven? So in that terms, do you do better on slow burning fuels like proteins and fats versus fat burning fuels like carbs? And it even dials it in and gives a very specific food list of like, here's the most ideal foods for you. So for me, this was really insightful because I was eating that, lean, boneless, skinless chicken breast, where I actually do better with like dark meat chicken and fattier cuts of meats that are higher in purines, and then certain types of vegetables. So I blend that with a food sensitivity test to really give somebody, okay, here's the ideal eating path for you, which makes a huge difference so that we can start optimizing food intake first, which is going to help to deliver some of the nutrients needed for somebody to feel better, to bring things back into balance while eliminating like inflammation and digestive upset at the same time.
Wow. Again, I'm like thinking, geez, that's so much information that you can give someone. I was just thinking, do most people that come to you, are they trying to lose weight? Because I feel like weight loss is it's obviously a hot topic everywhere. Everyone wants to lose weight. But I also feel like potentially if someone's reaching out to like a nutrition person, that they're wanting to change their body composition, or again, is it more of the feeling of health as we talked about before?
It always boils down to the feeling of health. So whether it's somebody coming to me because they're struggling with a thyroid condition that they have medication and are not getting any better, or it's somebody with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or it's somebody looking for weight loss, at the end of the day, they kind of all want the same thing, because once we eliminate whatever the issue is, it gives them that space to come back into balance, to feel like themselves again, to be comfortable in their own body. It's just every individual is going to have a different block or path to that.
So that's actually a really interesting topic, because I feel like in a large percentage of the population that we work with, the idea of thyroid comes up in one form or another, right? And it's typically around not enough thyroid hormone being produced, or hypothyroidism in some regard. Can you talk to us more about that? What is the thyroid? What is the reason, for needing the thyroid hormone, and why might somebody not have enough of it? And then how does it relate to the rest of the body?
That's the second half of my health story. So at one point I was actually diagnosed with hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's, which was triggered by toxic mold in my house. Again, we have to go back and ask that question, well, why did you have a thyroid issue in the first place? And look at these, collect all these clues about what led to that possibility, what impacted the thyroid. And the thyroid, just like anything else, it can be a contributor to the problem, or it can be the result of a problem. And we may never really know where it started. It's kind of like that age old question, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, was it a thyroid problem first, or was it a gut dysfunction problem first? And we're never going to know that answer, but that's why in my approach, it's to address all the systems of the body, in the first place. It's so fascinating to me. I do see a lot of clients coming through my practice that they've been diagnosed hypothyroidism, and that's the only thing that's being addressed or treated. Nobody's looking at their adrenals or their gut health or their liver function. And the thyroid is a big part of our metabolism. Like, it's what regulates our body temperature, for example. It helps us to burn fat and all those types of things. So it's very important, just like anything else in the body. And people have become so hyper focused on the thyroid in general. So the thyroid, though, is directly linked to the HPA axis, so the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, which regulates our circadian rhythm and our cortisol. So when there is dysfunction there, if that's downregulated for some reason, for example, the thyroid's going to kick in and it's going to start to work harder to compensate for that downregulation. So it may not actually be a thyroid problem. It could be an HPA axis problem that the thyroid is jumping in to help with. When we look at something like hypothyroidism, where that's typically where you have low thyroid hormones, so T4 and T3 are both low. I look at that and say, well, why is the thyroid having a problem like producing and converting hormone? Like, what is getting in the way of that? So that's where I really dig in and go, what does nutrient delivery look like? What does gut function look like? Because what are you eating? Are you eating the foods? Are you able to actually properly digest them and absorption and get those nutrients to the thyroid to make T4? The first question. And then secondly, what are you able to convert T4 into T3, which then there's specific nutrients that are required for that conversion to happen. And a large portion of that conversion takes place in liver tissue and in gut tissue. So if we have congested liver, we've got liver dysfunction stuff going on, we've got leaky gut, malabsorption of nutrients, inflammation of the gut going on, then those things are going to hugely affect the body's ability to convert thyroid hormone.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I was just going to recap that because I'm listening. I'm like, I want to make sure I have this right so that we can continue the conversation. This is going to be the way dumbed down version of what you just said, but make sure I'm on the right path, okay? So what you're saying is that first the question is, why is there a reason that the thyroid might be having to overwork? And so you gave a hypothesis of the adrenal, pituitary, hypothalamus, if that is being overly stimulated, and then the thyroid's kind of having to take over. But the second thing is that you're saying we have to eat the right foods so that we have the building blocks for the hormone that the thyroid creates, which is T4. But then we also have to make sure we have the appropriate factory, which you said the liver and the gut again, to translate this T4 into T3. And if I am correct, is T3 the one that we actually use in our body that we actually need to get to?
Yep, that's the one that gets taken up into the cells to do the process of what thyroid hormone does. And I love that. That's a great summation and analogy of it. I love how you use the word factory. Like, we've got to have this great factory, which is you need the pieces to put the parts together, like the nutrients that are going to help with the conversion. But we also have to cultivate healthy tissue, like liver tissue or gut tissue, or thyroid is converted in other tissues of the body. We have to have that healthy tissue in order for that conversion to happen in the first place.
So for picking up from that, we're trying to have this T3, which is the hormone that we've hopefully made. What is that T3 going to do for our bodies? And what happens when we don't have enough of that T3?
Mm-hmm. So going back to the thyroid is part of our metabolism. So having that T3 uptaken into the cells is going to help you to regulate, for example, your body temperature. A lot of people that are dealing with hypothyroidism, one of the signature signs is that they will feel cold all the time. Their hands and feet are cold all the time. I experienced this when I was going through it. You're cold when everybody else isn't. So some people think that they've just been that way their whole lives. And another thing that's been accepted as normal because it's common, but it's not. It helps us to regulate our weight. So a lot of people who are dealing with hypothyroidism are also struggling with weight loss. They have stubborn weight, they can't get it off, or they're gaining weight typically. It also helps with hair growth. So a lot of hypothyroid people will experience hair loss, whether that's from the scalp, or like a signature sign is the outer third portion of your eyebrow. So if you've noticed that the outer third portion of your eyebrow has gone missing, that can be an indication of a thyroid issue, along with skin quality. So dry skin is another one. Also helps with regulating our bowel movements. So people who are hypothyroid tend to be more on the constipation side of things. So with digestion, I mean, the list goes on and on for what thyroid hormone does for this, but those are probably some of the primary, like I said, signature symptoms or signs that something is off with your thyroid. Sleep is another one as well too.
Meaning like restless sleep or feeling like you always need to sleep?
So both, thanks for clarifying, is that, low energy, feeling tired all the time, but then also not being able to get restful sleep.
Gotcha. So I know that you brought up discussing your own health history. You brought up a couple terms that I want to go back and revisit because I'm seeing now how they kind of fit into the whole thyroid story. And the two terms I want to go back to is congested liver. And then you talked about H. pylori and what that can do to the gut overall. So can you expand on both of those? Because now that we have some context for how the gut and the liver relate to the thyroid and thyroid hormone production, I think then now all of a sudden that seems like, oh, wow, there's a direct connection there.
Yeah, totally. There is such a direct connection there. And these are two very important points to address when you've got some thyroid stuff going on. So when we talk about congested liver, that can be like a lot of people have a tendency to develop a non-alcoholic fatty liver condition where it's non-alcoholic. So you don't have to be drinking alcohol, but a lot of times that can happen from things like eating too many carbohydrates or too much sugar for what your body can tolerate. So I really like to talk about this. Most of the people that I see are usually already on, top of like a Whole30 diet or paleo. So they're quote unquote eating healthy, but they still could be consuming too many carbs or even natural sugars for what their body can tolerate. So we can get into this space of like what we call insulin resistance, which can contribute to this non-alcoholic fatty liver type of scenario that we're talking about. So the liver becomes sluggish in a sense. Also, if we think downstream of the gut being dysfunctional in some kind of way, like the liver also needs nutrients in order to do its job. So if we've got gut dysfunction happening, again, we're not absorbing the nutrients or delivering the nutrients to the liver for it to really do its job or for it to keep its tissues healthy. The liver is also in charge of excreting excess toxins and excess estrogen. So that's why on that Dutch test, we look at phase 1 estrogen metabolism, which kind of helps us understand how is estrogen moving out of the body and what does liver health look like in association with that. Elevated levels of estrogen in the body, which also can contribute to weight gain, by the way, can also trigger thyroid dysfunction. So if the liver is not healthy, if it's congested, we get this backup of estrogen, but we can also get a backup of toxins because the liver is also primarily in charge of moving toxins out of the body. And there's certain toxins that then can contribute back to what looks like a thyroid disorder also. So like chlorine, bromelain, fluoride, things that are found in our everyday water, like tap water, shower water, can actually render thyroid hormone inactive.
Oh, wow.
And it can't be then utilized through the cells, which is very interesting. These are a couple of like the main reasons on the liver specifically, why it's important to focus on liver health. One is that, we want to make sure that the liver tissue is healthy in order to convert that thyroid hormone. We also want to make sure that the liver is running optimally to excrete some of these things, get them out of the body in order to keep our thyroid happy and just like cultivate a healthy environment internally for all systems outside of the thyroid. So that's a little bit on the liver piece. H. pylori, so common. And probably most medical professionals out there, a lot of people would say, well, it's normal. It's another one of those normal things. And yes, we all have a little bit of H. pylori going on in our gut, but when it becomes an overgrowth is when it's become problematic. And you can even Google this. There's quite a bit of research out there about how H. pylori is linked to ulcers, and then even stomach cancer.
Wow.
So H. pylori is a bacteria. It actually feeds off of stomach acid, and stomach acid is what we use to digest nutrients, right? To digest our food so that we can absorb nutrients. And so this H. pylori, when it starts to manifest and become overgrown, it really starts to impair our ability to digest food and absorb nutrients. It also produces its own biochemicals internally in the body, which can create internal stress and inflammation, which then just wear down the intestinal lining even more. I mean, things like ulcers and cancers definitely aren't good for us either, right? And this is just one type of intestinal bacteria that we can come across. Dr. Isabella Wentz has noted this quite a bit in her research, that she has seen H. pylori very synonymously with Hashimoto's, which is a autoimmune hypothyroidism condition that people are struggling with. Because as it relates to autoimmune process specifically, is in an autoimmune process, we've got what we call leaky gut for a looser term, which is that inflamed intestinal lining, inflamed immune system. This is one of those things that can widely contribute to that, which then facilitates the autoimmune process in a lot of different ways. H. pylori in a nutshell is just it can become a nasty bacteria if it's left to its own devices, which can negatively impair our ability to digest and absorb nutrients overall that then we need for the factory of the thyroid.
I feel kind of like a celebrity for making up that term. But I hope that keeps it framed in people's brains, so that we can continue to follow the story. Because as we introduced you, we're talking about how all these complex systems go together, which to Charlie and I, and probably most of the listeners, we didn't study this stuff. It can be very complex. One question, but two parts. If we're thinking about the congested liver, and we're also thinking about overgrowths potentially in the gut, how are you working to improve these things? I know with the congested liver, you mentioned maybe too many carbs for what you can handle. So is it just like cutting the carbs and getting the appropriate food balance? And does that also solve the gut thing? What are the steps there?
Yeah, it's a multifactorial approach because there is no one size fits all solution. And like we mentioned earlier, the body is a complex network of systems that are going on. The solution is one part diet, one part rest, one part exercise, one part stress reduction. And stress is an umbrella term for every kind of external and internal stress. So like toxins, gut bugs, and the mental emotional piece. And then supplementation. So I like to start with diet and supplementation first, because if we can figure out what foods are right for somebody's body, then it can start functioning more at its potential. And by figuring out those right foods, to your point, it's going to alleviate some of the burden on the liver. If there's like an overconsumption of carbs going on, it's also going to reduce digestive stress when they're eating the right types of foods and the right macronutrient balance for their body. And I find that when we start there, people instantly start to have more energy and feel a little bit better, which gives them the resources and the bandwidth to work on some of the other aspects of improving their health overall. And then the supplement piece in the beginning, I find really critical as well too, because when we look at the lab testing, we're going to see where people have some vital voids, some, pretty strong imbalances, and the supplements can come in and help to correct those imbalances by delivering nutrients. I explain it in the way of, well, if you eat a steak, but you've got poor digestion to start with, you're probably only absorbing 50% of the nutrients that the steak has to offer you. One of the first things that I start off with are supplements that help to improve digestion, like things like a digestive enzyme, L-glutamine, that's going to help to heal the intestinal lining so that they can start getting the most bang for their buck with everything that they put in their mouth moving forward when you're spending money on really good quality food and then other supplements. So that helps the healing process. And then we'll implement things like a liver support supplement or glutathione or adaptogenic herbs to help with the adrenals, or selenium to help with the thyroid, to help, continue progress in those areas. But ultimately, the end game goal is to reduce as many stressors on the body as possible. So to change the lifestyle so that we've minimized as many toxins in the environment as possible. We've optimized clean eating for best digestion and absorption of nutrient purposes. So we've done this overhaul in the environment essentially to set somebody up for the best case scenario. And then we also have to recognize that we live life still and that, like, especially when it comes to toxins, they are all around us. We can't avoid them completely. So here's a handful of foods or supplements that are going to help support the body in that process all the time. So things like, beets and dandelion and grapefruit and lemon are some of the most powerful, naturally detoxifying foods available to us that we can incorporate into our diet, or eating fermented foods, which are going to give us exposure to beneficial bacteria that are going to keep the gut healthy. So there's things that we can do with food. And then there's things that we can supplement in the interim for what we can't get our hands on, or just to make sure that we're getting enough all the time.
I love it. So we talked about the hypothyroid side of things, the Hashimoto side of things. But I know with thyroid issues, there's also the opposite side, the hyperthyroid issues. Is it the same idea, but in reverse, or is that a completely different animal?
It's a little bit different. So when we've got hypo, the thyroid is underperforming. When you've got hyper, the thyroid is overperforming. So in both of those cases, we have to ask the question of why. What's overstimulating, like in the hyper scenario, what is overstimulating the thyroid in those cases? And this is, again, I think that where HPA axis dysfunction is probably one of those primary triggers. When the adrenals are downregulated, the thyroid's going to kick in and it's going to become hyperactive in some cases in order to compensate for what the adrenals can't do. It can compensate in other areas it's all part of the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is all of our glands that produce hormone. So anywhere where there might be a kink in that system, you may see the thyroid jump into the rescue to try to support, something else that's sinking.
And can you just expand a little bit on the HPA axis? I think that part is still a little bit unclear to me, as far as like, I think we've done an awesome job with the liver and the gut, but then I think this is another part of the story that's been brought up. Can you just kind of clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, so I like to explain the HPA axis. So it's the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And we've got, like, think about the hypothalamus it's in the brain. And I think of it like the CEO of the body. So it's what CEOs do. They observe the marketplace and they make the big decisions in the business, right? So that's what your hypothalamus is doing. It's observing the body, it's monitoring the marketplace, and based on what it's sensing and feeling, it's going to make decisions. And the pituitary gland is kind of the second in command. So the hypothalamus will then signal to the pituitary gland, which is also up within the skull and the brain region. The pituitary gland is like the president of operations. So this is the president of operations that delegate actions to, like, your vice presidents or your director of operations. And so the adrenals then are the director of operations. The thyroid gland is also director of operations. The pituitary gland sends out thyroid stimulating hormone to the thyroid to tell it to do its job. It sends out ACHT to the adrenals to tell the adrenals to do their job. So this is also a great conversation, because when people are diagnosed with a thyroid issue, there's actually 6 different thyroid profiles. Dr. Karazian talks about this really great in his book, Why Do I Still Have Thyroid Symptoms? And he goes through these different profiles. And one of these profiles can be hypothyroidism to a secondary pituitary dysfunction. So it's actually a missignaling issue in the HPA axis is happening that's causing this issue in the thyroid, right? So we want to go back upstream and see, like, well, why is that happening? To talk a little bit more about the adrenals are what primarily produce cortisol for us. Some of the listeners might know cortisol is our stress hormone. When we're stressed out, the body releases cortisol. But cortisol is also what gives us energy to get up in the morning. So when we do a 4-point cortisol test, which means taking 4 samples throughout the day to look at cortisol, we can see the rhythm of cortisol. And it should peak about 2 hours after waking, which is what gives you that energy to get out of bed, get your workout in, go off, take the kids to school, do all the things in the morning. And then it slowly tapers off throughout the rest of the day. And it's at its lowest point at nighttime so that we can easily go to sleep. But cortisol also helps to regulate blood sugar, for example. So when blood sugar drops too low, the body releases cortisol to bring it back to normal. It also is what addresses inflammation for us. So this is where you'll hear of like, maybe you guys yourselves or like athletes, when they have an injury, they get a cortisone injection because cortisone is converted into cortisol, and cortisol is a natural anti-inflammatory or a painkiller. These are prime clues for how we get to HPA axis dysfunction though, right? Because if somebody's experiencing a lot of stress, inflammation, roller coaster rides with their blood sugar, the body is then constantly like putting out cortisol and utilizing this resource, which then creates this dysfunction because it's being overutilized or there's too much demand for it. And so something like this, when we see a lot of chronic stress, inflammation, blood sugar imbalances that dysregulates that HPA axis, that cortisol rhythm, then we get some of these other downstream effects into thyroid and other things that are going on in the body.
Wow. I feel like with your tests and the way you're thinking, it's like you're really trying to get to what is leading to what. And again, what I love that you brought up before, we never know which came first, the chicken or the egg, or did it start with the factory shut down, or what did it start with all the stress, or did it start with, whatever it was. But it's important that you're looking at all these systems because we don't know which one caused which one. We just know there's dysfunction. And I think we can see that again in those symptoms that are like seen as very common. So maybe they're normal, but we know they shouldn't be normal. So as I'm listening to this, and I'm sure our listeners are thinking the same thing, wow, this is really in depth. That seems like a lot of work and a lot of stuff. What does it look like to like the practical application of this? Is it like months long? Is this take a whole 5 years to work through all this? Is it take a week? Tell us about that. What is the practical application of figuring this out, changing this, adjusting that?
It is a process, like I kind of said in the beginning that what you're experiencing now didn't happen overnight. It's an accumulation of things that have gone along throughout your lifetime. And so we have to set the expectation that you're not going to heal it overnight too. And I think in our society, we're looking for the silver bullet to fix whatever the thing is, and it just doesn't exist. If there is a so-called silver bullet out there, it's usually short-lived results. It's not long-lasting and it's not sustainable. And so in the work that I do, like it's really about helping people to create a lifestyle that supports the way that they want to be feeling. So with all this lab testing, we use this data to then guide recommendations for diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, supplementation, and toxin removal. And then I coach them through this process that usually goes on for a couple of months. Having said that, though, they start to feel better, like immediately with some of the changes. So the very first thing that we talked about that we work on is diet. When we make some of those changes, energy goes up, they start feeling better. They even lose a little bit of weight. We implement supplements, they feel better. And then it's just like rungs on the ladder where they keep moving up and up and up until we finally resolve it. So like with my clients, when I work with them, we do checkpoints about every 90 days to measure progress, to make sure that we're on the right track with things. And it's reasonable to say that within 90 days, somebody should be feeling exponentially better, and then just depending on the person and the depth of what's going on with them, sometimes we work together it's 4 months, sometimes it's 6 months, and sometimes it's 12 months. It really just depends on where a person is at and how much work that they have to do in terms of the depth of the dysfunction and also their ability to comply. I'm sure you guys know this in the work that you do. We can lead a horse to water, but we can't make them drink. So it's their ability to take action, but that's actually something that I work on with them. I also infuse a lot of transformational coaching techniques in the work that I do with clients where we're rewiring belief systems and actually building a mindset that supports the actions that they want to be taking so that they can achieve success and maintain it for the rest of their lives too.
So if somebody's listening to this right now and like in their head, they're raising their hand, they're saying, oh yeah, I've definitely experiencing fatigue. Oh yeah, I've been told that I have a thyroid issue and maybe I'm doing something right now to address the thyroid issue that's showing up on my blood panels. Oh yeah, I've been having stubborn weight loss or kind of consistent weight gain no matter what I've been trying. how can somebody connect with you? How can somebody find out more? And I guess, I mean, the first question is, does somebody have to work with you in person, or can they work with you virtually? And then if it's the latter, how can our listeners connect with you and find out more?
Yeah, I'm 100% virtual, just like we're doing today. I'm in San Diego. I've been working virtually ever since I started doing this work. I've got clients in Australia, Canada, the UK, all over the US. So it's really awesome that we can access some of this lab testing around the world, which is amazing. People can definitely reach out to me through my website, which is holistichealthboss.com, and that's holistic with a W. I'm really active and share a lot of tips and information like we've been sharing today over on Instagram, Holistic Health Boss as well too.
I love it. I love it. Now, is there anything that we haven't asked you that we should have asked you about your area of expertise in regards to thyroid, gut, liver, that whole connection, HPA axis? Is there anything we haven't touched on today that you're thinking, yeah, this is something that's kind of a missing piece?
Oh, we touched on so much today. And the one thing that we haven't really dove in and talked to you a ton about is sleep. This is something that I also see very commonly overlooked, as well as commonly accepted just to be the way that it is. And sleep is so critical to the repair process of the body. So if somebody's not going to sleep during the right time, so the most critical time for us to be sleeping is from 10 p.m. to about 4 a.m. If you're missing that window of sleep, it's like you're waking up with a half a tank of gas every single day. You don't have a full tank for your body to do all the things that you probably want to do. You're in a depleted state. Or maybe somebody's sleeping during that time, but they're getting broken sleep. So the body, based on this circadian rhythm, this cortisol rhythm that we alluded to and talked to about today, based on that rhythm, which is ruled by the sun and moon cycles, actually, that's why we have this rhythm in our body, because we are diurnal, day dwelling creatures versus nocturnal, like our cats or some other things where they dwell in the nighttime. So based on this rhythm, there's some very critical things that our body should be doing at very certain times of the day. And for the listeners, if you want to see something visual for this, just Google a Chinese medicine body clock. And in Chinese medicine, they've actually like outlined this very well, where you can see, for example, your blood pressure will always be highest around 6 p.m. based on the circadian rhythms. And so many people have sleep issues, I feel like, and they've just been living with that. So I think that is another huge healing opportunity that I find that a lot of people aren't addressing. And when we fix that, again, people start to make leaps and bounds in just feeling overall better and getting to the place that they want to be in.
That's fantastic. Now, normally we ask about practical application steps, but I feel like at the end of the day, like people need to get this testing done to really be able to hone in on what they need to be doing for their body. But maybe I'm wrong with that. So do you have any kind of, general tips that like across the board, if most people apply them, they'd be worthwhile things for them to do?
I mean, there's always a starting point for people, and that's true. And ultimately, test and don't guess is the fastest, quickest way to the results that you're probably looking to achieve, because it is just going to be more specific. But in general, like some things that I think that everybody could be practicing that are going to improve their overall state of being, like well-being, is eating an anti-inflammatory diet. So we do know that there are some foods out there that are just very inflammatory, like gluten, dairy, soy, sugar, alcohol. Sometimes grains in general can be lumped into that category as well, just depending on the person. Getting that good quality sleep during the right time. So nailing that 10 to 4 time frame for sleep and trying to sleep solid through the night. From an exercise perspective, the lesson that I had to learn coming into this with like a fitness background and always training hard was that when your body's already in a stressed and depleted state, the last thing that it needs is an intense workout. And so being able to assess that and give yourself a day of rest, or like when I was healing Hashimoto's stuff, I literally committed to only doing yoga and walking for 30 days. I stopped lifting so that my body could repair and recover. And then, from a stress perspective, I think that's just a little bit different for everybody, but we tend to look at stress relieving practices as reactive practices, like, oh, I'm stressed, so now I'm going to go for a walk, or now I'm going to meditate, versus we want to be emptying our stress cup every single day. And so having a proactive daily routine is really critical and important. And you'll find that you'll just move through life easier in that kind of way. And from a toxin removal level, if I was to say like one area that you 100% should look to remove toxins from, it's your food. Like anything that you are directly ingesting that's going to have a direct impact on your body. So that means eating organic as much as possible, hormone free, grass-fed type of meats are going to be beneficial. And then from this foundation, you can expand out and you can start to do more as that you have the bandwidth to do that.
That's perfect.
Awesome. Anyways, the one question we like to wrap up and ask all of our guests is, what is your definition of health?
My definition of health is basically having a physical and mental space that gives me the freedom to do anything that I want, whether that's traveling. There was times in my health journey where I wasn't feeling well, and I love to travel. And I just, spending money and time to go to these amazing places in Europe and like battling brain fog the whole time you're there to like enjoy the experience. Like, I don't want that, right? Like, I want to be able to soak it all in. Or it's having the mental and physical capacity to be creative in my business and to show up 100% for my clients and do work that's like super fulfilling. So I think the definition of health is freedom in a sense. It's having the freedom to really be and do whatever you want in life.
I love it. And for our listeners, that wasn't staged. So Jenn, just a little background. Charlie and I always talk about exercise and that's our specialty. And people are always like, oh, you guys must be like exercise geeks. I'm like, yeah, but the story isn't all about exercise. The story is about you living your life and what exercise can do to help with that. So it all comes back to, we have to take care of our health so that we can enjoy whatever a fulfilling life means to you or me or Jenn or whoever. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad that we're all on the same page with that.
Yeah, Jenn, thank you so much for sharing your time, your expertise with us. This was fantastic. And I know I got a ton out of it. I feel like Julie got a ton out of it. And I'm sure all of our listeners got a ton out of it. So thank you.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me on, you guys. It's just so important to share these messages so other people can find their true health.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician. Hey there, it's Charlie again. One last thing. I want to let you in on a secret project that I've been working on for quite some time now. I am planning on releasing a book by the middle of summer 2021. But here's the thing, because I'm self-publishing this book, there's only going to be a limited number of copies available at any given time. So to learn more about this book and to be one of the first to find out when this book actually gets released, what I need you to do is go to exerciseforlifemethod.com. There you'll find out more information as well as some exclusive bonuses that I'm offering just for simply staying in the loop with what's going on with this book. So to learn more and claim your bonuses, go to exerciseforlifemethod.com, enter in your information, and you'll be automatically kept up to date. Learn all about the book and bonuses at exerciseforlifemethod.com.